enemies when you've got a friend like Patrick. Throughout SpongeBob, we've seen Patrick shine as a clumsiest sidekick, but there are times when he crosses the line, and he does it with style. Today, we're diving into moments when Patrick was the worst best friend, starting with the unforgettable episode, Rule of Dummies. What happens when Patrick becomes king? Well, get ready for a spectacle of inflated egos, royal chaos, and decisions no one asked for in Season 4, Episode 17B. The episode opens with one of the strangest and most chaotic scenes ever, which, being SpongeBob, is saying something. A dapper starfish arrives at Patrick's door with an important revelation, but instead of listening, our dear shining star Patrick accuses him of being there for something as serious as library books. You know, actual priorities. Because of course, when someone posh comes to your door, chances are they're coming to arrest you for literary crimes. And after that crime drama worthy accusation, Patrick runs up to find his best friend. And what better way to get into SpongeBob's house than by crashing through the TV and destroying everything in his path? Because if there is something that always defines Patricio, it is his subtlety. A confused Bob tries to help and speaks to the dashing star, who eventually reveals his purpose. Patrick is royalty. Well, according to a confusing family tree at least.
Sir Patrick, which makes you a descendant of royalty. You are a king. And now it's time I adjourn to the royal ministry, where I shall be at your service, your highness.
What could possibly go wrong with such a spontaneous coronation? Of course, because if someone like Patrick becomes king, obviously nothing could go wrong. Spoiler alert, everything goes wrong. After receiving his crown, which by the way he treats like a snack. Yeah, because he needs manners when you can lick your new royal crown. Patrick decides to explore his new life of luxury, and like any new king, his first stop is, of course, the Krusty Krab, because nothing says royal life like a burger fist. Oh, but wait, here comes Mr. Krabs, who sees the perfect opportunity to flatten his wallet. Let's not forget that, for Mr. Krabs, true royalty is money, loyalty, honor, respect. All of that takes a backseat when there are bills to receivable. Of course, it takes long for King Patrick to abuse his status to avoid paying, because of course, why bother taking out money when you can declare yourself exempt because you're a blue blood? However, in an unexpected twist, Mr. Krabs, with all his love of greenbacks, decides to set a limit, charge a king, or rather kick him out of his restaurant worthy of the Olympics. And here's where we learn a valuable lesson: even kings have limits. Although to be honest, Patrick never quite understood that word. Limits, responsibilities, common sense, they're not in this starfish's dictionary. As they leave the Krabby Patty, Patrick and Bob come across a man who is ready to enjoy his precious Krabby Patty, but of course, our self-proclaimed king, who immediately decides that this delicious morsel belongs to him. Patrick orders him with all authority to give him his food. The poor man tries to resist, but Bob, with his endless optimism and desire to please his friend, produces a supposed document that supports Patrick's absurd demands. The result? One less burger for the citizen and another victory for King Patrick's inflated ego, because apparently there is no greater royal privilege than taking someone else's lunch. But the real madness begins. Patrick, completely convinced that his crown makes him the owner of everything, starts claiming anything that comes his way. Burgers, comic books, lollipops, jewelry, even a baby's pacifier. That's right, not even the leadless ones are safe from his tyranny. This is the point where we can't help but think, how did Bob come to tolerate so much? Our dear fluffy friend, always willing to support his best friend, seems to be in a constant struggle between loyalty and utter embarrassment. Because if this doesn't scream worst best friend, I don't know what does. Maybe the fact that all of Bikini Bottom is starting to hate Patrick. And here we are, caught up in this chaos as Bob tries to justify the unjustifiable. And if that wasn't enough, Patrick, in his infinite royal wisdom, decides that moving Squidward's house is a great idea. The reason? Because he can. Oh, and because he wants to install a Ferris wheel right next to his already ridiculously ostentatious royal tower. Because of course, nothing says royalty like a barcade carnival ride. Who needs peace and quiet when you can annoy your neighbors with heavy machinery and impulsive decisions? Naturally, our dear Squidward, who just wanted to enjoy a quiet day at home, finds himself thrown literally into chaos. Imagine his perspective. He's quietly drinking tea or playing his clarinet, and suddenly his house starts shaking as if it were part of an earthquake. And all because His Majesty Patrick thought it was funny. Squidward, with the veins on his forehead about to burst, runs to claim him. And here comes the golden moment when Squidward, with his sarcasm sharp as a knife.
Can you honestly believe that mindless starfish could possibly be the king of anything? King of morons? Maybe.
And you know what? He's absolutely right. This isn't just an angry neighbor's comment, it's the truth we've all wanted to yell at Patrick since the beginning of the episode. Because let's face it, what kind of king thinks despotism is measured by how many houses he can move and how many pacifiers he can steal? Squidward, though bitter and antisocial, is currently the voice of reason in Bikini Bottom, and when the construction workers laugh and start questioning Patrick, we get a glimmer of hope. Finally, after turning his simple rock into a ridiculously ostentatious palace and alienating all of his subjects, Patrick has something of an epiphany. Well, sort of, because let's be honest, expecting introspection from Patrick is like expecting Bikini Bottom to have a normal day. It's just not going to happen. It all happens when he's confronted by his own reflection in the mirror, and surprised, his reflection decides to talk to him, calling him dumb. Which, let's face it, is exactly what we've all been thinking since the beginning of the episode. In a hilarious twist, Patrick not only hears this comment, but takes it as a revelation. His panic grows as his mind, or whatever he has in there, tries to process the obvious, that maybe, just maybe, he's not the best king Bikini Bottom could have. This moment is like the climax of an absurdist play. It's not that Patrick really understands the impact of his actions, he just gets so scared of his reflection that he decides being king is no longer for him. A rather fitting end to a reign that began and ended as a total disaster.
I'm you, and you are me. Ah! What have I become?
And seeing how monstrous he's become, Patrick finally decides to give up. But what's the solution here? Well, it turns out that this absurd episode culminates in the revelation that the real king isn't Patrick, it's Gary. Yes, Gary, SpongeBob's pet. Because of course, what episode of SpongeBob would be complete without a completely random illogical twist? Gary, as always, handles the situation with a calmness and dignity that overshadows all the chaos of the episode. Who needs a crown when you have a natural class and a look that says it all? As Patrick loses his temper and throws away his brief reign, Gary simply takes his place without saying a word, proving that true leaders don't need to brag. Because if anyone was gonna end up ruling Bikini Bottom, it had to be Gary, right? It's an ending that, while absurd, has a strange logic that only this show can pull off. Rule of Thumb shows us how power can corrupt even the most naive. And if one thing is clear, is that Patrick doesn't need a crown to be king of disasters. Title or not, his ability to get into trouble will always be worthy of a throne. But if you think this episode has reached the limits of absurdity, wait until you see the next one. SpongeBob and Patrick are about to prove that in Bikini Bottom, there is no limit to the insanity. Brace yourselves, because what's coming promises to leave you even more perplexed. Don't miss it. This episode starts out like any other. SpongeBob and Gary enjoying a quiet day together until the tornado named Patrick arrives, ready to remind us that friendship sometimes hurts, literally. SpongeBob is playing tag with Gary, his trusty nail. When Patrick makes his entrance, naturally SpongeBob invites him to play because what could possibly go wrong? Everything seems to be going well, even fun, until Gary decides to latch onto Patrick, and not just latch on, but to wrap him in a hug of endless slime while purring like a happy cat. If that's not love, I don't know what is. Patrick's reaction? Non-stop laughing. Meanwhile, Bob with his infinite patience explained that this is Gary's way of showing his affection. Of course, because nothing says I love you like an extra dose of snail slime. What Bob doesn't mention, and he should, is that Gary doesn't have a pause button on his affection, and unfortunately, this little detail will be the start of a much bigger problem, because in Bikini Bottom, if something can go wrong, it probably will. Patrick, enchanted with his new admirer, already seems to be enjoying the moment a little too much, while Bob doesn't suspect that this is the beginning of a love triangle or something equally absurd. Night falls and Bob, like any responsible owner, tries to take Gary home, but of course, Patrick has a great idea to have Gary stay overnight with him. Why not? As usual, Bob agrees because, well, he never says no. This, of course, only ensures that things get even weirder the next day. In the morning, Patrick arrives at Bob's house with Gary now following him around like he's his lifelong best friend. He shows it off proudly as if he's just won a prize. Bob, for his part, tries to remain calm, but it's clear that Gary has other priorities. This is where the episode starts to enter surreal territory with a snail that seems to have changed owners and Bob who starts to feel displaced. Because let's be honest, watching your best friend steal your pet isn't exactly the ideal of friendship.
But I do know Gary knows who he wants to go with. Now I suggest you put him down and let him choose.
Fine, but I would like to remind him who it was that fed him and housed him and sat at his bedside when he was sick and massaged his eye stalks when his eyes were sore. Okay, Gary, go ahead, show him.
Excuse me? Sure, Patrick. Because you are clearly an expert on pets and healthy relationships, it's like you're saying, let's let Gary decide, but I'm gonna subtly manipulate him into choosing his new best friend. It's at this point that all of us, the viewers, began to wonder, why is Bob still friends with him? But the worst thing is, how could Gary choose Patrick when Bob has done so much for him? Heartbroken, Bob decides to fill the void Gary left in his life. His solution, a series of new pets that prove just how desperate he is. First, a worm named Rex, who seems more interested in escaping than being a loyal pet.
I'm sure glad we went our separate ways, Gary. A worm really is the pet for me. So loyal, so trusting, always by my side!
Bob, I think you had too much faith in a whizzing earthworm. Seriously, did you really think that would work? Rex seemed more interested in running away than being your new best friend. Meanwhile, Gary continues to be enamored with Patrick, completely ignoring him. Because, of course, nothing says loyalty like abandoning your longtime owner for a clueless starfish. But Bob won't give up, and that's where Larry the grumpy snail comes in. And what does this new pet do? Basically the opposite of friendly. Larry growls at him, ignores him, and to top it off, makes him sleep on the floor. Bob, how did you not see this coming? The signs were all over the place. Trying with Larry only leaves him more tired and lonelier than before. Eventually, Patrick shows up at Bob's house with Larry on his head like a hat. The reason? Washing his clothes, because, of course, that's completely normal. But when there's a twist, Gary gets into the washing machine along with the pants Patrick was wearing, and the truth is revealed.
He only liked me for my shorts!
No, Patrick! He wanted the cookie in your pocket!
So Gary wasn't interested in him? All this drama, all this tension over a simple cookie. This moment is pure absurd comedy, but also, let's be honest, it's the perfect ending to show that Gary was never really interested in Patrick, because at the end of the day, food always wins. And so, Gary returns to SpongeBob, leaving Patrick depressed for thinking they had something special. Surprise Patrick, relationships based on cookies don't usually last. This episode not only left us with unforgettable moments, but also with a certainty that sometimes SpongeBob's worst enemy is his best friend. But if you thought this was Patrick's most absurd moment, wait until you see the next episode on this list, where his genius reaches historic levels. Let's continue exploring the worst of the best of Bikini Bottom. In Valentine's Day, SpongeBob has the perfect surprise planned for his best friend, but a small mishap turns the celebration into a complete disaster. Misunderstandings, out of control emotions, and a hysterical Patrick make this episode a roller coaster of chaos and broken hearts. Get ready, because not even love is safe from disaster. Let's start with the opening scene. It's Valentine's Day in Bikini Bottom, and everything, literally everything, is shaped like a heart. Even the rocks. SpongeBob with his characteristic enthusiasm is spreading love in the form of cards everywhere. And when I say love, I mean an energy so cloying it could cause cavities. First, we have Squidward, who unsurprisingly rips up the card without even looking at it. Then Bob, the king of perseverance, chases after Mrs. Puff, who is so excited to receive her card that she loses control of her boat and crashes into a fire hydrant. That's when you realize that Valentine's Day in Bikini Bottom is not only chaotic, but also dangerous. Finally, Bob meets Plankton, and what does he do? He gives him a microscopic sized card, because, of course, even villains deserve some love. Give it up for Bob. always being the best. The plot really takes off when Bob meets Sandy. She gives him a heart made from a giant acorn, and Bob, in a gesture that could only come from his bubbling brain, returns the gesture by blowing chocolate syrup on it.
Happy Valentine's Day, SpongeBob. I'm nuts for you.
Well, I'm bubbles for you, Sandy.
This is the kind of line that, when you hear it as a kid, you think, how sweet. But now as an adult, you can only wonder, did this make any sense in some parallel galaxy? Anyway, Bob's sweetness knows no bounds. Next, they both work on Patrick's gift, a heart-shaped hot air balloon made out of chocolate. Because when it comes to Valentine's Day, Bob goes big. Sandy will be in charge of taking the balloon to the park, while Bob distracts Patrick. Meanwhile, Patrick is busy chiseling rock with rock to turn it into a heart. This is the kind of effort you really appreciate until you see the result. Bob shows up just as Patrick finishes, and what he hands him is not a heart, but ashes. Literally, after receiving his gift, Bob promises Patrick that he has something special for him, but he's not ready yet. And this is where everything starts to fall apart. Because if there's one thing Patricio doesn't handle well, it's patience. Bob takes him to the amusement park to distract him, and Patrick, in his characteristic style, assumes the entire park is his present. As Bob tries to calm Patrick's expectations, Sandy calls in on the walkie-talkie to report that the balloon is under attack by chocolate-eating mollusks. Because, of course, what's a Valentine's Day gift without a dose of chaos?
SpongeBob, we got ourselves a little problem. I got a pack of chocolate-eating scalp trying to wrestle a balloon. Get away, you sweet-toothed varmint! I'm gonna be a little late.
And so, Bob's plan begins to unravel, while Sandy battles the mollusks. Bob tries to buy time by taking Patrick to the magic wheel, but Patrick is so impatient that he starts acting like a spoiled child at Christmas. Tensions rise as a desperate Bob tries to calm Patrick down by offering him a handshake as a gift.
Patrick, you know how sometimes you plan something special and things just don't work out?
No. Oh, holy mackerel! Is it hot up here or what?
And this is where the title of this episode makes sense. Patrick, the supposed best friend, loses his mind in the most dramatic way possible. Not only does he go on a rampage, but he also unleashes chaos in the park, destroying everything shaped like a heart. Because according to Patrick, if he can't be happy, no one else should be. When he finally corners Bob, it looks like things are about to take a dark turn.
You broke my heart! Now I'm gonna break something of yours!
Patrick says this with such conviction that you really wonder, did Bob do something wrong here? Because all I see is a friend trying too hard for someone who doesn't deserve it. But just then, the chocolate balloon appears in the sky, patched up with band-aids and escorted by the mollusks. When Patrick finally sees the balloon, his attitude changes instantly. He runs towards it, hugs it, and because it couldn't be any other way, bites it, exploding it into 1,000 pieces and covering everyone in chocolate.
Oh, SpongeBob, you didn't have to give me anything.
Patrick, always so contradictory. This ending is a reminder that despite everything, Bob always sees the best in his friend. And honestly, maybe we all need a little of that optimism in our lives. But speaking of chaos and unquestionable decisions, this isn't the only episode that makes us ask, how did we get here? No knows knows, or as we like to call it, the day Patrick was given superpowers he didn't know how to use. This episode reminds us why not everyone should have access to basic senses. First, we see Squidward arrive home with fresh flowers, happy as never before. But of course, peace doesn't last long because, surprise, SpongeBob was hiding among the flowers, as if that was a normal thing. And not only that, his nose ends up inside Squidward's face. And there we have it, the first moment where Bob and Patrick remind us why Squidward hates them so much. But honestly, who could blame him? I mean, no one expects their floral decoration to come with surprise guests. And if that wasn't enough, Patrick shows up to welt the flowers with his mere presence, literally. Then, in a classic act of passive-aggressive cruelty, Squidward pretends to have Patrick's nose and launches it outside his house, sending the two friends out to find it. Because what's a SpongeBob episode without a little humiliation for Patrick? It is at this point that Patrick, with all the subtlety of a bulldozer, realizes that he has no sense. But of course, Patrick being Patrick doesn't listen and the snail ends up biting his face off. Honestly, this snail has more common sense than Patrick. Who can blame him? I'd bite someone too if they try to use me as a prosthetic nose.
I guess I'll always be a noseless freak.
Well, I don't really understand why he gives it so much weight, but let's move on. After this little disaster, Patrick decides it's time for him to have a real nose. And of course, Bob supports him because that's what a best friend does. Although, to be honest, did anyone actually think giving Patrick a nose was a good idea? This is where things get even more absurd. The plastic surgeon's office. With an endless wall of noses to choose from, it feels more like a costume shop than a serious clinic. Patrick unsurprisingly takes his time trying on noses as if it were a fashion show. But the real chaos comes when he decides to take off the bandage on his own. Forget patience or logic. Patrick uses giant scissors, electric saws, and even tools that look like they came straight from a mechanic's workshop. And at the end, surrounded by dust and smoke, he reviews his new nose with disproportionate satisfaction. Classic Patrick.
There it is, Patrick, your brand new sniffer! Looking good, buddy.
Now, with his new nose, Patrick is ready to explore the fascinating world of smells. At first, everything seems wonderful. He enjoys the scent of fresh flowers, gets carried away by the freshly baked bread that makes him levitate, and then gets wrapped in the fragrant cloud of a local perfumery. It's as if his life has gone from black and white to color in a matter of seconds.
I'm sick! Nobody told me about bad smells!
Oh, Patrick. Sweet, naive Patrick. That stench is so potent that it takes the form of a monster, tapping him on the arm as if to say, "Welcome to the other side of smells, friend." The transition from olfactory ecstasy to sheer horror is as abrupt as it is comical. And for the first time, Patrick begins to wonder if having a nose was such a good idea after all. Classic luck. But this is the moment when Patrick goes from being just annoying to becoming a walking disaster, because not only does he decide that he must rid the world of bad smells, but he also starts criticizing his friends for their scent. Things quickly get worse when Patrick takes his crusade against bad odors to the next level. First, he breaks into Squidward's house, destroying a wall to get straight to the refrigerator to get rid of his beloved imported cheese. Why throw it away when he can burn it too? Logical, right? Then, in a questionable attempt to help Bob, she decides to block all of his orifices with plugs because he was sweating while lifting stuffed animals. Friendship or attempted murder? Hard to say. Eventually, he reaches the Krusty Krab, who becomes his final victim, or so we think. He fills the restaurant with candles and air fresheners, transforming it into an oasis of scent, but also a completely empty space because customers can't eat surrounded by so much fragrance. Bravo, Patrick! If the goal was to ruin everything and alienate everyone, he succeeded in doing so in spades. And if you thought it couldn't get any worse, Patrick also runs into Sandy. Instead of greeting her like any normal friend, he sprays her with air freshener and sends her to take a bath because, according to him, she looks like a bag of fleas. Nothing like insulting the most dangerous friend in the group to show off our great sense of smell, right?
Oh, that new hunker of his has turned him into a complete jerk!
Patrick's friends reach their limits. Donning hazmat suits and a giant ball of trash, they show up at his house, determined to put an end to his nose once and for all. As soon as he opens the door, the stench invades his brand new nostril, and the inevitable happens. His nose begins to shrink, wrinkle, and finally falls up like a tiny defeated raisin. It's a moment as absurd as it is gratifying. The solution, though extreme, works perfectly, and his friends can't help but feel immense relief. Patrick, on the other hand, loses his nose, and with it, all the madness he had unleashed. A chaotic and ridiculous ending, exactly as one would expect in Bikini Bottom. No nose knows is a reminder that not all change is good, especially if it involves giving Patrick more sensory power. The safe friends are there to support each other, but Patrick never got that memo in I'm with Stupid. This adorable starfish disaster takes the concept of friendship to such a low level that even Bikini Bottom falls short. If you ever thought loyalty was at the core of a friendship, Patrick is here to prove us wrong. It all starts with a situation that, by Patrick's standard, is already unusual. We find him cleaning. Yes, cleaning. This alone should have been the title of the episode. And here's Bob doing what any good friend would do, inviting you over for a little distraction. Our dear slacker has traded in the jellyfish for the feather duster, but Patrick, as usual, decides to turn a simple no into a Broadway-worthy show. Seriously, Patrick, you don't even have furniture. How much cleaning is there? Now comes Patrick's classic emotional breakdown. What started out as a cleaning spree turns into an impromptu therapy session. It turns out his parents are coming to visit and he's convinced they see him as an idiot. Well, at least they agree with the audience on that.
Patrick, if your parents think you're dumb, then they must not know what dumb really is.
And there's Bob, the friend of the year, willing to bear the cross of stupidity to save Patrick's ego, given the worst idea of his life, being stupid in front of Patrick's parents. This is the aquatic equivalent of jumping in front of a train for your friend. Except here, the train is the opinion of two clueless starfish, Marty and Janet, aka the champions of negative reinforcement. If you ever thought your parents were harsh on you, wait until you see them praise Patrick for such basic accomplishments as opening a door. This isn't support. It's sarcasm disguised as pride. Patrick, of course, accepts all this with a smile, but one can't help but wonder, is it naivety or has he simply accepted his fate as the lovable fool of the family? And of course, while being showered with kisses for every little thing he does right.
Hooray, the idiot's here! I mean, I'll get it!
Nothing says I care about my best friend like calling him an idiot in front of your parents. But Bob, true to his role as a martyr, is willing to humiliate himself to help his friend. This is friendship at the don't try this at home level. Bob gives it his all, literally from absurd greetings to behavior that defies logic. But the most absurd thing is that Patrick's parents don't seem to suspect a thing. Maybe the real moral here is that common sense is hereditary. There have been too many insults in one day. I couldn't imagine if it were every day. I don't think they were even best friends, or rather friends. Oops. It had to be said, but it's too much. Like everything in life, it has its limits. Our poor Sponge can't take it anymore. So Bob finally speaks decently and asks Patrick to talk in the kitchen.
Patrick, could you let up on the insults just a little bit?
Oh, were those too complicated for you? I'll try dumbing them down a bit.
Patrick, I get the feeling that you think I really am dumb.
This isn't an argument, he's a master sarcast putting down his apprentice. Not only does Patrick refuse to acknowledge his toxicity, he ups the ante with a t-shirt that literally mocks Bob. If it wasn't so funny, it would be tragic. But Bob finally lays his cards on the table. But did you think that would make Patrick think? Not at all. Instead, he just keeps laughing. Because to him, it's all a game, quality friendship. This is the turning point. Our beloved optimist realizes that he is surrounded by people who simply do not understand him, as he tries to explain that he's actually smart, much smarter than his great friend. Our favorite square sponge finally loses his patience and runs away. He's been taken too long. While Patrick's parents congratulate him for proving that he's smarter than a fool. But the most ridiculous thing is yet to come. These aren't even Patrick's parents. Yes, you heard right. The episode ends on such an absurd twist that one can't help but wonder, is there anyone here with any common sense? And just when Patrick realizes the deception, Squidward knocks on the door.
Excuse me, does this lovely couple belong to you? They've been standing outside my house saying, "Where's Patrick?" all day. It's driving me nuts!
Mom! Dad!
Patrick has no choice but to go out and hug his real parents, who also treat him like a fool. But who are we kidding? All the other stars are pretty stupid. Maddie and Janet realize that they don't even have children, and all the spectacle they put on. That's all for today. We've reached the end of our journey through the episodes that show us that maybe Patrick isn't the worst best friend. He manages to take the crown of obliviousness, while Bob proves that being a good friend means enduring more than humanly possible. But in the end, we laugh, we get frustrated, and above all, we realize that SpongeBob always manages to transform the absurd into art. Thanks for joining us on this crazy ride. Remember that in the world of Bikini Bottom, logic is optional and fun is guaranteed. See you in the next video.